Eva and I are both going to do short presentations, and then we'll invite John Hattie back up for a panel conversation. So without further ado, Dr. Eva Baker.
Good morning. Oh, you're such good kids. So I resisted rewriting my entire talk all the while Alan was speaking because I had seen John's slides before and knew what to expect. So I only have one quick thing as a reaction, aside from, lovable, irascible, and brilliant. I would say that my defensive posture in all of this, because I probably live in System 1, is that I had to get up very early, as you know, to get here on time. And my husband had the alarm set at some ungodly hour, and I was dreaming. I dream, massive numbers of episodes, all in color, sentient, the whole thing. And he said, "Eva," the alarm went off. And I said, wait, I have to get back into my body. So that gives you a sense that I have multiple narratives working on at the same time, and I understand that they're constructed. So this is a discussion, a low-tech discussion with very low-tech slides about evidence, and attempts to follow on in a practical way to some of the work that John has been doing over these years that has been so influential. And so here are some questions that I don't need to read to you. You can see them yourself. But I think it's questions you should be asking yourself rather than say, evidence. We all love evidence. And I think the third one is kind of interesting. That is, how right do you have to be in order to convince whatever audience you think you need to convince of the truth or plausibility of what your claim is. So I was going to very briefly buzz through the discussion of how evidence could be compiled. And I think what John has done is a massive compilation of evidence and put it in a usable form. We're talking about how potentially to make it more usable for certain purposes. So there's evidence associated with outcomes, which could be behaviors, learning attitudes. They could be in countable events, which I'll explain, or using assessments or tests. And then I want to speak briefly about the intervention part, which is more about what John was talking about, and discuss some of the things that have sort of, that Lee Tsai, Casey Choi, Aisha Madni, a number of people throughout the center have been working on for a long time, meaning in our lifetime, about 2 years. So countable outcomes, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, we're thinking about events, purchases. Don't ask me about how much I spend in Candy Crush. Resets, engagement time, response speed, and longer term things like, how many kids are in go-to 2-year, 4-year institutions after high school, how many kids are in jobs after 6 months, entry-level jobs and things of that sort. And obviously these things can be regarded as the effects or benefits against the costs that Dexter Fletcher mentioned yesterday. So let me switch now to tests or assessment outcomes, just trying to reflect what I thought was going on in this group, but maybe not. Apologies to Bob Mislevy and many of his colleagues here who know a lot more about validity evidence than I do. But when you think about a test's quality, the watchword is validity. And the kind of thing we're trying to deal with is, what's the relevance of the test to the kind of thing you're looking at? What are the purposes that you're using the test for? Steve is here. He's interested in how you classify individuals, select and classify individuals in the military. That's a pretty clear function for the kinds of measures that he has, and he's interested in both achievement kinds of things as well as interest and preference kinds of things in order to make the experience for the sailor better. Others of us who have been looking at accountability systems know that maybe just feeding the public maw for information they think they want and or providing information for teachers so they can change what they're doing. In fact, most of the validity studies that I have seen don't address how teachers are using this information or could use this information, that overly focus on the first kind of accountability. There's issues of accuracy, where the cut scores are placed, and then the important thing that Bob Mislevy and others have written about is what's the sequence, the logic of the inferences you draw from the evidence you have that leads you to the decisions or conclusions you have to make. And from my point of view, which I've been saying for probably 35 years, unfortunately, is the issue of sensitivity to instruction. I think that's a key validity issue for assessments in schools where there's a notion, whether it's fact or not, that things are going to get better. Okay, so the idea of these assessments are that they're presumably stimulating the world to get better at what they're doing. So sensitivity to instruction is pretty obvious, but not found very often. And what it really means is that unless you can document that these measures actually can change, or you can show how experts and novices differ, or what the progress is, you really shouldn't be using them for accountability, because they're not good measures of growth, or for evaluation of products. And it seems to me that we're pretty weak on documenting sensitivity to instruction operationally. So how do you do that? One notion is this compiled knowledge. John Hattie's meta-analyses. There are literature reviews, and these all go down and down at some level from general, how well you can generalize. But there's lit reviews, summaries of best practice, and then actual models and exemplars that you could provide that illustrate the kind of thing that you're interested in. And what we've been doing here for probably since almost 3 years now, I guess, is looking at feature analysis, which is a practice of, integrating qualitative ratings about interventions or tests with quantitative data. And so don't ask me one question about the quantitative side. We have the experts in the room to answer those, but I can talk to you a little bit about the qualitative ratings. In rating we started with tests. We wanted to know if you could look at tests or assessments, whichever you prefer, and decompose certain elements of them and make and estimate the impact of those elements or how they played into actual kids' achievement. All right, so we started with something I think I talked about in an ETS lecture, Angoff lecture in 1997, so I'm really rapidly moving ahead. This is something that we've operationalized here, and we've looked at cognition, the kinds of thinking that kids are asked to do, domain knowledge or procedures, whatever it might be, the task attributes, what are kids really being asked to do, and how much does that connect up with the cognition claims that are being made. linguistic demands, which is ever more important in our world, and then taking some of these things together, you could get an estimate of the complexity of what you're asking people to do. The quantitative side of this is that we use as kind of outcome measures, difficulty levels, the variance accounted for by some of these features. And the interesting thing is the ones that we found accounted for above 50% of the variation in performance. This is kind of a big number for those of you who aren't particularly interested in numbers. And then what Lee and KC were able to do was give us some indicators when we had waves of data over years of the malleability of items, or in other words, their likelihood to change, and therefore being good markers as a sensitivity to instruction. So the uses of feature analysis in our head, and what we've been trying to do, is both in the design and evaluation side of the world. You could use features that have been shown either, from research studies of the sort that John has summarized and interpreted, or the ones that are done in the environment that you're working in, to support rapid prototyping, which is something pretty much is on everybody's mind. Also to predict performance if you get enough information over time, so you could actually shortcut some of the evaluation activity. Now, this is sort of heresy for me to say, but on the other hand, the bureaucracy of getting evaluation data now has just, one of those curves that have gone straight up. It's harder and harder for us to get cases of the sort we would like in real schools, so we can talk to real people about them. And I think the notion of using feature analysis will reduce risk. We think it reduces cost, and that essentially you can think about it as taking our features plus many of the sort that both Rich Mayer and John Hattie have talked about, and verify them in the interventions of interest. And that includes the context of interest, the kids of interest, what their backgrounds are, and what their challenges might be. Other uses of feature analysis really would be to approach the transfer issue. That is, how applicable might these findings be in different domains, different contexts, different age levels? How can we look and provide information back to teachers in a form that they could use? Because this is, at one level, more microscopic, but on the other level, it's actionable. And it isn't sort of at the big variable level, it's, I can do this, and there may be some impact. So the other things that we have done with this, which is, again, a little heretical, is compare unlike interventions and unlike outcomes by using the features as a form of meta-analysis, but not as a compiled way of taking lots of studies. And we've also been looking at conditional predictions, that is what might matter in making those predictions, and what, if you think about it, moving from a single case to a neighborhood of domains or a neighborhood of kid tasks, you can operationalize what you're thinking about as transfer of the processes that may be useful over time. So in closing, I'm at 34 seconds, so I really want some, props after this. That you really need to remember that the rules of evidence vary in quality, And the evidence, just because you claim it's evidence, may not be sufficient or credible, that it's likely to be conditional, related to environments and settings and people, and that there are costs of having it and costs without having it, and you need to decide that on the basis of what you're doing. Essentially, this makes the world, we think, more transparent, and maybe your phony narrative clearer to the rest of the world, or it may provide you a new narrative to allow yourself to get deeper and better in instruction. So I think I'm done.
There we go. So good morning, everyone. I'm Sara DeWitt, and I am from PBS Kids, and like Eva, I think I have a few things I want to say before I get into my presentation. I think many of you are probably familiar with PBS Kids because it delivers a lot of television. I am unabashedly proud of working for a television entity, and the reason for that is really to think about television as yet another tool. As the printing press threw books into every household, the television is yet another tool that is in every household. And also, I think an important thing to remember is that the television has incredible reach right now. So PBS Kids content, 70% of kids between the ages of 2 and 8, it's actually a little more than 70%, watch something on PBS Kids every single week. That's tremendous reach. On the streaming platforms that we work on at PBS Kids Digital, we deliver 5 billion video streams per year, and 12 million kids a month come to pbskids.org to play games. So this is a tool that really has potential to reach so many children and to do something, I think, really positive with it. For those of you who are looking for a little bit of inspiration about the power of media in the household, I encourage you to go to YouTube and look up Fred Rogers' Senate hearing in 1968, where he made the case for why the Public Broadcasting Act should be put into effect by Congress. And what he got up there and said was, nervously, and he admitted so, I'm very nervous to do this, and therefore I'm not going to sing this, I'm just going to read it to you. That's what he says. Is that if you were to turn on television that day, primarily what children would see is cartoon characters hitting each other on the heads with frying pans. And he said, we owe it to our children to do something else. This is very powerful. It's a very powerful tool, and there's a lot we can do with it. So I encourage all of you to take a look at that. So at PBS Kids, I head up the digital section of the group, which is focused then on game development, apps, and on streaming video. And if you don't know very much about PBS Kids, everything that we do, it's part of our mission, has to be focused on curriculum. Every show that comes to us has to come to us with a curriculum and with advisors. And then we use our own advisors to make sure that we can properly vet what our shows are working on. So you'll recognize some characters up here, I would guess. Even if you don't have children in our demographic, ages 2 to 8, you probably are familiar with Curious George. You may not know that that show on PBS Kids is based on an engineering curriculum. It's all about taking things apart. George is a very curious monkey. You may remember. He likes to take a lot of things apart and can't always put them back together again. And so that's a wonderful place to start with early engineering principles for young children. So 6 years ago, the PBS Kids team submitted a proposal to the U.S. Department of Education Office of Innovation, the Ready to Learn grant. And this was the premise that we brought there. There have been many, many studies about PBS Kids television shows and their potential impact on learning for children. You may have heard about some of them through the years, some increased literacy skills, all kinds of things have come through the years. Most recently, just this June, Texas Tech did a study about Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood and how it helped children with social and emotional skills. So lots of studies still going on about television. We also have done a lot of studies about individual games on pbskids.org and on our apps, and how children can learn from those experiences. And so the premise that we brought then to this proposal, this 5-year research proposal, was what happens when you put them together? And that may seem really obvious. I mean, at the very least, children are getting more exposure to these ideas, and therefore we should see some learning gains. But no one had actually done this kind of research that we could find. No one had actually showed that this could make a difference. And so this was the image that all of us printed out and put over our desks, is how could we bring all of these things together? Take the video itself, the television, and tie it to a game on the web or perhaps a mobile game. And then also, very importantly for PBS, is an offline activity. We're really the only media company that encourages people to then turn off the screen and go do something else, because we want kids to go have that hands-on experience. And so how can we then put all this together? If we were crafting our media very deliberately to hit at all of these different media types with educational principles, would kids walk away with a better understanding of the skills we were trying to present? So I mentioned earlier that every show is tied to a curriculum. We have several frameworks that we have worked with many outside experts. Art Baruti is the one who helped guide this one, along with several other folks in early math, to develop a framework that then we can kind of hook all of our content onto. So all the shows that are focused on math, how do they connect, all the games, and that kind of thing. I should mention that all of our shows also have a focus on social emotional learning, because we feel like that's really the core, most important thing for preschoolers. And so everything kind of has to be on there, but then what is the additional piece that we're focused on? So I want to walk you through a study that we did of some of our content, and then do a quick case study of a product that we developed out of that. We did this study with WestEd, or WestEd conducted the study, where we were trying to use this transmedia content and see how it affected children's math skills. And then also, what does this do to parent awareness? So in any given week, a child would be playing a Curious George game, they might be watching a dinosaur train video, and then there was an activity idea for the parents to do with the child. The gains overall were positive. We felt really great about this. The positive gains in their numerical sense from the videos that they watched and the games that they played, and the high levels of parent-child engagement. I think the most exciting thing, the thing that really stood out to us and got us kind of back thinking about other resources we could develop, was the increased awareness among parents of how their children were developing these skills. And I think this was especially interesting to us because we had done a survey before we kicked off this work in math of parents and their understanding of math and how they felt about math. And what we learned is that you may not be too surprised about, well, actually, maybe this room would be surprised by this, because I think a lot of you do a lot of math in your daily life. But the majority of parents said to us that math really stressed them out. It was very high anxiety for them. They hear it's different now. I have no idea how to teach it to my kid. I've never been good at math. Really, that's something they should learn at school. I can't help them with that. It really was astonishing how strongly parents reacted to this. So to then have a study where then parents at the end of it reported that they felt a lot more comfortable with it was very exciting to us. And as we dug a little deeper, what we learned is just the act of watching their kids play these games kind of normalized it for them. They realized, like, oh, I can do that. Oh yeah, Curious George, that's funny. Yeah, I can do that. It made parents realize that this big math wasn't quite so scary. It was something that they could also interact with. We also took some of this content into a formal setting, which is unusual for us. Everything we do is really focused on informal environments, home environments, after-school settings. But in this case, there was a teacher's guide created. This is EDC CSRI. They did a randomized control trial. And the curriculum then was set up for teachers to kind of guide kids through these media experiences. And similarly, we saw some significant gains in the math skills, but also the teachers who enacted that supplement increased their own beliefs in mathematics knowledge. This is preschool teachers, so not teachers who are necessarily trained in these specific subjects to teach. So they may have not had much context for math when they walked into this trial. So taking all of this kind of work that's happening out in the research field and then putting it into new media content is what we're tasked with. How do we take all of this and think about the best ways to present it to children? So we launched an app in May called Measure Up, and it's focused on one of those key domains from the math framework, measurement, and therefore also early counting and numeracy. And we took video clips and games and put them together into a sequenced experience for children. One thing I haven't mentioned very much is the importance of character. One of the things that we know really helps with engagement in PBS Kids content is the fact that kids love these characters and love these stories. The narrative is really key to bringing kids into the experience, immersing them in it, and helping motivate them to want to play with these experiences. So you'll see here, Measure Up is focused on 3 different PBS Kids characters. Peg plus Cat. If you aren't familiar with this show, you should take a look. It really is like Mathland. She lives in a world where it's all graph paper, and she's constantly able to work out problems. So it's a really funny show also. Dinosaur Train. Sorry, I should have mentioned, Peg plus Cat comes from the Fred Rogers Company. Dinosaur Train from the Jim Henson Company. It really is dinosaurs riding on trains. What preschooler wouldn't be completely thrilled by this? And Sid the Science Kid, also from the Jim Henson Company. But we weren't just thinking about the kids. We also realized, because of that work, about the parent engagement. We wanted to bring parents into this experience. So I'll note there's a parent component here, but I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So I'm not going to do a live demo, but I'll just explain a little bit about it. There is a meta-narrative. You are helping the PBS kids, Del, Dot, and D, I don't know if you knew they had names, on their quest to find a hidden treasure. They have a map, and they need to follow that map. And as they land in each of these areas, they are accessing video clips and playing games that then tie to different specific math areas. We also worked in some toys and tools. This is Cat from Peg plus Cat in the lower right, using a watering can to help flowers grow. And you're looking at the different heights of these flowers and being asked some questions about how they compare. We also then were thinking about different ways to present the same types of content, kind of grouping content well. So Sid the Science Kid, you're pulling down a bug and you're measuring the units there. On the right side, you're measuring the units in each of these caterpillars and putting hats with the numbers on them on these three birds. So trying to group several like concepts together and give kids different ways of approaching it. And this might have happened after they had watched a clip from one of the shows where there's a Peg plus Cat clip where they lose their measuring stick that's helping them follow a treasure map, but they remember that the stick is the same height as Cat. And since height is the same as length lying down, you could measure it in cats. So you've seen that episode, you've heard the little song, and you can then get to play these games where you're trying out the principles. So Eva mentioned feature analysis as being critical, and we partnered with CRESST on this project. And these are some of the examples here of where you would be looking at feature analysis for games or for video. So looking at the design properties, how many rounds are in this game? What action is required to advance the game? Really getting into every single piece of a game or a video to understand what a child might be doing or learning at any given point. And this piece of information, this data that we were gathering as kids are playing, is then what allowed us to bring the parents into the experience. So the Parent Companion app then allows a parent, and this was demoed last night, allows a parent to go in and say, my child is playing Measure Up, and we can begin to tell them what are the areas this child has begun to explore? What are the things they've been doing? Very simple ways of telling parents whether or not what kids are learning. We're not trying to get into incredible depth with parents. That's another thing about vocabulary with parents. They don't want to know every single detail. They want to know, yeah, your kid could use a little more work on this, or they're doing great with this. But for every one of these, we then offer the parent an idea of something to do at home. Go into the block corner and try building a tower together, and then counting how many blocks it took to make that tower. Those kinds of things, giving parents little tips for offline activities. And this is something that we learned also was very critical, is using the vocabulary and the tone that helped parents feel empowered to engage in this experience. A long time ago, we did some work with parents in literacy, and particularly parents in low-income areas, kids who went to Title I schools. And we tried out different phrases with them. One, you need to read to your kids every night. That was a no-go. That immediately set up a parent's defenses. I don't have time, that's the teacher's job, really, you can't put that pressure on me. Very strong response from this particular population. If we shifted it to any time can be learning time, it completely changed the way the parents heard what was being said to them. Any time is learning time. In the grocery store, ask your child to look for the letter C and point it out when they see it. That was something parents latched onto and got really excited about. So we've been trying to take that same kind of understanding about what parents want to hear and how they can engage with their children to these kinds of experiences. So that's it for my case study of Measure Up. I'd like to now invite Eva and John back to the stage, and we're going to have a panel conversation. So thank you.
Be in the middle, John.
I think John in the middle.
John, sit here. A rose between two thorns.
So I was particularly interested in listening to your talk about so much of this conversation is about, so often when we talk about assessment, is about the student learning and what the students are getting. But you certainly were saying, no, it's really, let's talk more about the teacher. And that's something that I think has come up so much in our work as well. As soon as you have that parent piece, it really changes the whole game. So let's talk a little bit more about the role of grown-up mediation in the experience.
Well, it starts from the premise that we learn stuff that we don't know, and therefore we need some expertise at certain points to know where to go next. And very often, that's where the adults come into the play. And we certainly took the view in this country 150 years ago that it was compulsory to send your kids to school on the premise that we can do it better than the parents. And I think we need to stand up to that, and I think we do. And it doesn't mean to say we don't want the parents involved, but many parents don't know how to make a difference to the kind of learning, and the kind of work you're doing is a way of helping them. But at certain times, the human skill of knowing what a kid knows, what they don't know, where to go next, and that's the key step. And as much as we can do it with adaptive work within computer programs and those things, quite often it requires a human judgment to say, don't do this, do that. Mm-hmm. It's a human judgment when to back off. It's a human judgment when to come in. A lot of kids don't know when to seek help. Unfortunately, a lot of classes, if you teach them to seek help, it's not valued by many teachers who see their job as solely. Surely our aim is to get it so that kids do become their own teachers. What I find stunning, given the kind of work you're doing, you see that with 5-year-olds often. By 8, they've learned that their job is to come to class and watch the teacher work.
Right.
So
stay in your seat.
There are some things I want teachers to do, dramatically so, and I think that's made the difference. There are some things I don't want them to do. But the skill that you see of teachers making those judgments, those evaluative judgments, is what I think is the key in this whole business. That's what we need to get better at.
So when you look at the kind of data like that Eva has been working on, that feature analysis, you talked about having to change the vocabulary, because you mentioned that you couldn't make the teachers all understand your world. You needed to get into their space. How do we get there?
Well, it's a good question. There are a lot of people in this room, I think, who are trying to get there. And what I wanted to add to what John and you had said is that there is a space between teachers and parents where learning facilitation also goes on. And it's kind of it's not exactly a neat skill continuum, but we have worked with LA's Best After School program. We have worked with LA Up, which is a 5-year-old and down program. And there are some really easy things to do. I'm not sure that at every age level and at every task level, we need to get into this decomposition of features. Mm-hmm. In some ways, I think the communication issue is combining them in a meaningful way, these features, so people get it. So if you say, like the everywhere learning or every time is learning time to parents, that it helps to talk. And so what kinds of things can we know the data are with 0 to 2-year-olds, and why our grandchildren probably have, that many more million words, which, the people who wrote the original work, Meaningful Differences, say you can never catch up. The game is over, at that point. And so if you can intervene with talk, and in some ways, it can be conveyed very simply, like a modifier, which we wouldn't use that word, but if you were saying it's an adverb, you tell people how something happens, not just whether it happens when you talk to a child. Those modifiers, adverbs and adjectives, were one of the markers that made a huge difference in the talk for upper or middle class families and families that were on the lower level. They did not use modifiers, pretty simple stuff, when they spoke to kids. And at least that's how I read the work. And so I think that would be something. I think it's not so much, I think we have to go through the decomposition for us to understand better. But I think the challenge is recombining, kind of like DNA, how you recombine these pieces in a way that people can use them at all different levels of expertise, adults or siblings, at all different levels to help kids.
So I know of several programs that are happening in the nonprofit space or in the government space, Text for Baby, the Vroom program, where they really are trying to get information out to parents. I don't remember from your list of studies, are there many studies about the potential impact of teachers talking to parents on child outcomes?
There are, and very, very low effects, because they work in different worlds. Mm-hmm. And they don't talk, when they talk to each other, it's not usually about learning, it's about the individual child and what they maybe they can and can't do, the achievement side of it. And so the home school programs are not noted by high effects, but most of those are from 5 years up.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's quite a different story when you talk about 0 to 4. And certainly the evidence we're looking at in our own work in this area is that intervention between 0 to 4, and like we use the Abecedarian program, which came out of this country, 160 learning games with 0 to 2s. Stunningly successful, and you can show massive effects in the blue zone with the parents. I can say this without the cameras on. Our problem is the early childhood people. They see it as their job to intervene sometimes and stop some of that parent interaction using those learning games. Mm-hmm. They often are the ones that stare off and say, learning, we're not going to teach them to read or write at age 2, which is not the point.
Right.
And so some of their thinking gets in the way. But that age group, no, dramatically so.
Right. I was thinking that, I had a list of compiled knowledge. The other thing that has worked that I remember is really good examples, because adults at whatever age can learn from examples. They don't need necessarily every case explicated. So I remember with my baby daughter, who now has babies of her own, an automatic thing I started doing without even thinking about it, which was, okay, put your left arm in your pajamas, put your right arm in your pajamas. I was just, and early research that we had looked at, and this was at the early version of WestEd, Swirl, was that kids who came to school without knowing, not just left, right, but not knowing prepositions, over, under, had not been exposed to those kinds of things, had much more difficulty in anything that was kind of academic, because prepositions turn out to be a big deal with any procedural and skill learning. So those are the kinds of things that I think can make a difference early on, that have made differences, and that we shouldn't necessarily keep getting more sophisticated and more sophisticated about it. I buy into what was said today and yesterday in the opening sessions about communication. And I'm not sure I'm the good one to do it, but I know there are skilled people who can do that translation.
Every kid in New Zealand who starts school at age 5 has to do Marie Clay's concepts about print within the first 6 weeks. The very first item is they give the kid a book upside down. 1 in 8 don't turn it around, and they all went to preschool.
Right.
The problem's still there.
Right.
So should we be teaching kids as if they're future parents?
No. I think there's this is where your feature analysis comes, as I understand it. This is where I think we need to come back to 4 or 5 things that we can do with those young kids. Like, we've given up saying to parents, read to your kid. We now say, speak to your kid.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Listen to them.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice if they could help them disinhibit and delay gratification, which is a massive skill in learning and language.
Right.
So giving them those half a dozen kind of those notions, for instance, through the learning games. Most parents of that age group don't have teachers. Most of the teachers in the early childhood sector don't see themselves as teachers of cognition. Mm-hmm. Play is one of our biggest problems because it's seen as social and emotional. Nothing wrong with that, but I want cognition as well. And it's just absent.
Well, it's kind of a bit like Alan was talking about System 1 and System 2. Exactly. People see themselves either as wholly, and especially in early childhood or primary age teaching, at either their skill building and giving these kids a running start so they can pass the test sometime later, which is kind of useless idea by itself, or they see them in dramatic play. Let's how many ways. I guess I can say this. My husband Harry is a docent at the Getty, and I suppose I can say something about he's going to have to deal with 5-year-olds. And they told him, which is already, some of you who know him, is going to be exciting. Part of their curriculum, which is quite a lovey, touchy-feely thing to me, but I don't, haven't experienced it, so I don't know. But they asked him to bring a treasured object into the teacher training session.
He bought you?
Not close. I told them, well, bring an AR, never mind. He's supposed to bring a treasured object. He's supposed to let someone else, another teacher or docent, adopt it. And then he would adopt theirs. And then the task is, now imagine how a 5-year-old would wonder about it. Now, Harry is a skilled psychologist with a clinical background, very interested in a lot of stuff. That just struck me as so far, starting in a place that wasn't likely to get where he was supposed to get, which is helping kids to look at art and see new things in it. It just seemed too far to me. But I think I see things like that in early childhood, and sometimes in primary education, it's aspirational in that sense.
Yeah, you talked about the skill, will, thrill, and I think the piece there that I'm finding myself thinking about so much is when you make the transition from surface knowledge and content to transfer to the deep space. And you talked about the importance of that and the fact that you believe it can be taught. Do you think it can be taught by a machine, or does it need to be a mediated experience?
Oh, look, I love Skinner, the behaviorist. He made a quote I love, that if you can replace a teacher with a computer, get rid of that teacher. Of course it can be done by a machine, it can be done by a teacher. The question is, how do you put those two interact? And when the machine fails, if you don't have a human there, the kid gets turned off. And it's a bit like when I look at, like I get probably 3 or 4 requests a week to review some new game or some new app. And my 2 questions is, have you ever implemented it in at least more than one class?
Right.
And have you got any evidence of its impact? Now that cuts out 99.99% of requests.
Right.
And they just want to sell me the idea. People love it. I couldn't care less if you loved it. It is, where is the evidence of that impact? Many of them can't even answer the question what that impact would even look like. And many times it is the teacher's skill of knowing when the kid to use it and when not to use it and when to go on is the essence. And so you need to interact those things. Like the fact that you're talking to the parents as well and not cutting them out is very valuable. Apps that cut the teachers out. I think the biggest development in apps that's going to make a difference, like there's been 173 meta-analyses on computers in schools since 1975. The effect size hasn't changed for 50 years. It's still about 0.2, 0.3. It's still well in that yellow zone. Don't tell me that's the answer. The answer is how you use it.
Right.
And that evaluative thinking of the person who is saying to the kid how you use it. And that's where you've got to get smarter about bringing those together. Don't develop the app, develop the place to which you can help the teacher, the person using it, even the kid if they're the teacher, understand and evaluate their impact and their progress. Why do we play a lot of Candy Crush? It knows exactly what your prior score is, your achievement. It knows the criteria of challenge, success criteria, the Goldilocks principle, not too hard, not too easy. It knows something teachers don't know. Don't change it. Don't say at the end of the lesson, oh, you did your best. And then what happens? Like you, I spend hours playing, feedback, whatever, till you get there. And what happens when you get there? Not like teachers. Oh, you've done a good job, Eve, handed in, go out and play. It increases it. I think we have a lot to learn from that learning in those games that we can use in schools. But I need both.
I spent a lot of time looking at Pokemon, and I don't necessarily mean Pokemon Go even, just the game Pokemon. And how an 8-year-old collects so much information and categorizes that information and makes decisions about strategy based on that information. And how that game very nicely continues to motivate them to want to keep achieving the next level. How do you get that? How do you find that?
Well, I thought I would take that kind of thinking and put it in the regular classrooms.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, kids love the challenge of learning. And what I find intriguing with the work we're doing on Surface to Deep is when I ask the question, help me find any research studies that find out when is the right time to switch from surface to deep. I can't find any. I'm not sure there's an actual moment in time, but there must be some notion of moving from one to the other. We're nowhere near close to that. Now, a lot of games, and like Pokemon and Mario Brothers, is very low level in terms of what's being learned, and we tend to overdo it because we overlearn it. And so the challenge doesn't increase in terms of what you're learning. And so there's some things we have to be careful with there, but there's a lot of that kind of work. But on the other hand, I'm also struck with the learning design people I work with. The most they know about learning is the word in their title. There are hundreds of theories of learning out there. When I ask teachers, how many theories of learning can you name? Most people couldn't name one. We've got a lot of work to bring that back into the equation to do the kind of things you're talking about. It's exciting.
It's exciting and a big challenge for us, especially adding to some of the discussion we heard yesterday about teacher training or teacher development and how to penetrate that environment with the notion of what would be good for everyone, what would accelerate and expand people's understanding. But the difficulty of doing it within a system, at least our system, that values other things for teachers to do. So at some point it's like I'm in an environment, I love my environment, I get to choose a lot of what I do. Teachers really don't. They make some choices, but it's within a parameter, at least in this country, that where testing has become so important, performance of schools have become important, and some of the monitoring of teaching that goes on is about whether they're likely to advance those scores rather than impact kids. And we need to find a way so that we either switch the assessments, I have a dumb idea which has never worked yet, but that if we could find the right assessments at the right times and have those be mobilized by the policy community, then we might be able to get where we're going. Right now, I think the testing and what we think we know that would be good for kids and teachers are at odds with each other. So that's a strategy issue for us to think through. Maybe John has the answer with, given that you have, a marvelous opportunity having a strong research background and being in a policy decision role, that's something that is a dream for many of us. Hasn't yet happened in, let's say, anybody in our federal departments of education, occasionally in state departments. Gino Flores, who's sitting in the front row, was an enormously talented teacher who then became deputy superintendent of California and was able to bring into what some of the bureaucracy, some of the things he actually knew how to do with kids. But that's not typical of the bureaucracy that we have either at the federal, state, and sometimes
but one thing
local
we can
level.
do, and certainly my discovery from my political self, is that it's about the narrative.
Right.
And it's the degree, and every principal, the biggest power they have is they have control over the narrative. So I think they can do things. And certainly trying to do the work that you've been doing, the work I've been trying to do is changing that narrative to a debate about learning, about how parents can be involved in learning. Let's, for goodness sake, stop giving parents choice of schools. It's not worked, and when it works, schools choose the kids. Right. And so there's a whole narrative around that has just pushed us down the wrong path, and we're spending so much resources feeding that narrative. If we feed a narrative about what is it what are the expectations of when your kids start schools and what they can do? And here's how we can help you. And these are the kind of success criteria we can do using the kind of things you're doing. I think there's lots of ways we can. I'm not negative about this. I'm very optimistic that it can be done.
Well, we just have to internalize the comments that you made that I think many of us believe in the US, that spending a lot of money evaluating structural changes in schools, who makes the decision, how many grade levels or ranges are in a school, the choice options, that's pretty much a waste of lots of resources that could be put into instruction, learning, and gotten closer to the kid. A lot of these studies are, how many orders removed from what actually would happen to a child in a particular day.
I want to come back to the opening statement that you made and Alan made this morning about evidence. We're surrounded by it. Schools are awash with data. It's that interpretation of that evidence. And that's that evaluative thinking. It's about the interpretation. I think now, I'm shadowing a brand new teacher. I'm stunned with the message she's given from day one. Your kids are unique, which means she has to prepare everything herself. There's billions of stuff out there. Yeah. She gets the message that if you get into troubles and need help, I'm here to help you, which means don't come to me unless you fail. Right. And so we've got a whole narrative out there where teachers are on their own. We've got stunning things we can do about how we have to bring them together to have those discussions about collective efficacy, collective thoughts. Right. Requires good principles. There's plenty of them. The trouble is my solution is very expensive. Right.
Right.
Requires time.
And everybody wants the cheap, quick
Yep.
fix.
It
right?
requires getting into those judgments.
We have a few more minutes, so I'd like to invite the audience to bring any questions.
So mostly we're measuring performance. Thinking about motivation as a learned attribute of the student. I'm just thinking about where we might be going in terms of measuring motivation in students towards their school activities.
Instead of just performance.
Instead of
for
just
those who didn't hear the beginning.
Like, certainly, my visible learning is achievement. The latest one we've done is looking at how we think. We're looking at one related to physical. The good news is there's a team in Germany that's looking at the effect of motivation. I'm delighted they're doing it because it's much more complicated. I'm working with them, they're not there yet. The story's the same. Messages are quite different in different parts. But yes, they are really critical parts of schooling as well, and they should be in there. Yeah. But that work is, in terms of synthesizing, that work's going on. There's plenty of it. It just hasn't been very well synthesized. So happy to follow up. Put you onto
We have
the
a
team.
microphone coming to you right here. And go ahead and keep your hands up so we can get a microphone to the next person.
Hello. In some countries, teachers have a lot of leadway. In fact, they can actually send the administrator out the room if they choose to get on with the teaching and learning. And then in our country, at least in my experience as a teacher, it's often top-down leadership styles that I'm used to here. My question is this: do you think that performance has anything, particularly with teaching and learning, has anything to do with the leadership styles that is exercised at a school site, top-down versus bottom-up leadership?
In hearing your question, certainly when I look at teachers across that distribution I have, the teachers in the blue zone, one of my pet dislikes is teachers saying to me, I don't have the autonomy, I don't have the right to do it, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources. I'm sorry. Those teachers in the blue zone have the same autonomy, the same resources, the same time, the same. It's not about that. It is about how those great leaders can harness those powers of those teachers in the blue zone to work with them all across the school about how they think, the decisions they make. I do not like the notion of autonomy. If you're in the yellow zone, you have no right to teach as you wish. Great leadership will stop teachers teaching as they wish in the yellow zone. But yes, absolutely, there's no question that's where the principals come in. I've never seen a great school without a great principal. But I do think, in answering the first part of your question, I'm not interested in autonomy. I'm not interested in the teacher's right to teach as they wish, at all. If they're teaching great, they need to share what they're doing and how they're thinking about it. If they're not, they need to change.
So we had a question right here. Do you still have it? A question? No. Okay.
Oh,
That's fine.
Well,
We're
maybe
gonna be
it's
nice
time
for the next one.
maybe it's time for the break.
Any other questions? Yes, from here?
So I'm curious, Todd Rogers, who's a behavioral economist, does a lot of nudge work, and he was giving a talk at Harvard, and he was talking about how in politics, where he was working, everybody figured there's a lot of things that go into making a difference. In education, everybody wants one thing that does everything. When you disaggregate interventions, do you feed the notion that these things matter in isolation, and how do we, context matters, and this thing may really matter in this context, in this combination. So how do we manage that message and that understanding?
But the reason it took me 20 years to write the book was, I've got 250 influencers. Unbelievably, you're right, it's the overlap that matters. And in some ways, I made a mistake creating that league table of listing them all, and everyone thinks we're going to do these and not those, and that's the mistake. And in some ways, I regret it. On the other hand, it kind of worked, got attention. It is about that overlap. It is about those, you say one, I want 2 or 3 big messages. And that's why I hark back all the time about evaluative thinking. So you're right, it is that. It's trying to get my one on the table. I'm trying to get on the table. Like, we've had a history in our country of looking at structure, of looking at cutting out teachers. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to get the teacher back on the table, but I'm trying to get the expert teacher out, and I'm trying to get back the message, and they exist right now. You don't have to go to Hong Kong or Singapore to find them. Have you got the courage here? And so there is, you're right, it absolutely is about that narrative. And if you don't like my narrative, come up with yours. But you're right, you've only got one or two things that you can influence politicians with. Make sure they're big, they work, and they have impact, and you can deliver on them.
So we have time for 2 more questions. Okay.
Following on to that, the feature analysis work that Eva's been talking about presumably involves very well-defined codes that can be applied to media resources or other things. And people are rating these resources according to this metadata. You get these really high-value sets of metadata. And I'm interested in how that might help meta-analysis work or synthesis across meta-analysis work like you do. If you had standardized, reliable, slice and dice style metadata applied to each of these studies so that you could do the work you need to compare and to tease apart when things have been combined and so forth. I don't know if you could talk about maybe implications of that kind of work for what you do.
The most exciting thing to me at the moment in the synthesis of evidence is the qualitative meta-analyses methods that are coming through. And some of them are based on the kind of work that you're talking about. And that Mary Kenny did one recently on teacher subject matter knowledge. Stunning. Oh my God, that's harder to do than the stuff I do. But it is really exciting stuff and this is where getting better notions about features. Like if I'm being honest, a lot of the quantitative literature, the moderators are very weak. And whereas this kind of feature analysis, where it's much richer, I think could lead us to a lot more interesting answers.
Eva, do you have a...
Agreed?
Oh, yes. I mean, way to go. I think that the one thing that we want to work on and that our team has sort of developed some approaches for is to look at these features in combination. We do find fascinating one at a time impacts. You can switch the problem and say, well, is this an aligned system? And you can say whether it is or it isn't. But if you're trying to say, as John said, well, some of the features that may not be the high value in his league table, but in combination with something else, may have a big impact. And that's why I collapsed a lot of thinking into, 2 words, conditional evidence, because I think that's, the way the world may work. But I want to support what John said about the conditions aren't one person at a time innovating. It really has to be some notion of what is trying to be accomplished that is shared in an environment and with the appropriate instructional or learning principles applied.
Okay, we have 17 seconds, so one last question.
I'm not sure I can do this in 17 seconds, but thank you all for your fantastic talks. First, I want to say that, and discussion. But I wanted to say something about, John, you made a very quick comment. When do we switch from surface to deep? And I wanted to call that out a little bit. There's a misconception in education, I call it a misconception, that emerged from Bloom's taxonomy.
Right.
And so Bloom's taxonomy was a descriptive taxonomy, and so many times people treat this as that you teach in this way. First you get them to do the surface level or the lower level and move up to this higher order thinking. And that's a misconception. You should always be moving toward deep understanding. You should always, no matter what you're teaching, even if it's teaching words, there can be shallow understanding and deep understanding, but you need the method that you get there in encouraging evaluation, deliberate retrieval, generating the information, all of that should be moving toward higher order, it's sometimes called, or deep learning. And so I guess that's just a comment, unless you disagree.
Well, we could end in a spirit of, togetherness, if you like. I would moderate your comment, Danielle, by saying, that I think you can start with deep, what people are now calling deep learning, but let's say complex tasks for kids, that they, I agree that those hierarchies like Bloom's taxonomy or Gagne, which was totally misconceived, the task analysis stuff, I think you really can start very little kids with complex tasks. They may have to go find the information because they will need a content base in order to do something. But then, so it is kind of a spiral, and I don't think John's talking about a linear staircase progression at all. But I think the mistake is that many teachers do think of it as stepwise. First you have to know all this stuff, then you might be able to, you know, move.
Bloom's taxonomy is the biggest con ever infested on education I know. It's got nothing to do with complexity of learning. Let's stop using it. Let's start looking at other ways. And I have a higher criteria than deep learning.
Right.
Transfer.
Transfer.
And I'm
Yeah,
happy
of
to
course.
transfer surface level knowledge.
Right, right. So maybe we've exhausted ourselves and the community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. That was great. Great.